I arrived at my sister's wedding early because I had been asked to help. That was a pattern in our family. I helped, I paid, I smoothed things over. I stayed quiet so everyone else could stay comfortable. I wore the navy suit my mother approved of, the one she said looked appropriate, which in her language meant it wouldn't draw attention. My sister, Claire, had texted me the night before reminding me not to make things awkward. I understood what she meant. Don't mention the loan I gave her. Don't mention that I paid the deposit on the venue. Don't mention that the florist invoice came to my email because my credit card was on file. Just smile, blend in. Be the older sibling who had everything together and therefore didn't need anything back. The ceremony was in a restored vineyard outside the city, the kind of place with gravel paths and old stone walls that photograph well. Guests drifted in with champagne flutes already in hand. I helped the coordinator move chairs when she realized the seating plan didn't match the head count. I stood with the ushers and handed out programs. When my mother arrived, she kissed my cheek and immediately straightened my tie, then whispered, "Remember, today is about your sister." I said of course, it always was. The first laugh happened before the ceremony even started. I overheard it near the bar, a sharp, surprised sound that made a few people turn. Someone had asked how I was related to the bride, and my aunt answered before I could. "That's the brother," she said, and then, leaning closer, added, "the reliable one." Another woman smiled and said, "Oh, the helper." They laughed together, lightly. As if it were affectionate, I smiled too because that was expected. Reliable, helper, words that sounded like compliments until you lived inside them. At the reception, the laughter was louder. The best man told a story about how Claire used to borrow my car and return it empty, and how I never complained. "He's basically allergic to saying no," he said, and the room laughed. My mother laughed the loudest. My father nodded as if this was proof of something admirable. I lifted my glass when the best man pointed at me, playing along because correcting the story would have been seen as ruining the mood. Then my sister took the microphone. She thanked everyone for coming, thanked her parents for their support, thanked her new husband's family for welcoming her. Then she said, "And thank you to my brother, who always shows up, even when he probably shouldn't." There was laughter again, this time sharper. Someone whistled. She smiled at me in a way that asked for permission after the fact. I felt my face heat, not from anger but from recognition. This was familiar. My usefulness framed as a joke. I thought that would be the end of it. I planned to leave early. I had an early flight the next morning for work. A client meeting that had already been rescheduled once so I could attend the wedding. I had booked my own hotel because the family rooms were reserved for out-of-town guests. Despite me living farther away than most of them, I was ready to slip out quietly. But then the speeches continued. My uncle stood up with a drink in his hand and decided it was his turn to be honest. He talked about family dynamics, about how every family has one who carries the load. He looked at me and said, "We all know who that is." The laughter that followed was bigger, less kind. Someone at the back clapped slowly. I felt something settle in my chest. Heavy and precise. This wasn't accidental. This was a pattern being celebrated. I glanced at my phone and saw a message from the venue manager asking me to confirm payment. For the final balance, it was due by midnight. I had told Claire weeks ago that I needed her to handle it. She had said she would. I realized then that she hadn't. The laughter rolled on around me while the reality of my position sharpened. I wasn't a guest. I was a safety net, and safety nets aren't meant to be seen. I paid the balance. I didn't think about it. My thumb moved the way it always did later when the dancing started. My mother came over and told me I should loosen up. "You look serious," she said. I asked her if she thought the jokes were kind. She waved her hand. "Don't be sensitive," she said. "You know how you are." That was another familiar phrase. It meant stop making us uncomfortable by noticing things. I stepped outside for air. The vineyard was quiet beyond the lights, rows of vines disappearing into the dark. I stood there longer than I meant to. When I went back in, the room felt different. Not hostile, comfortable, too comfortable with me being reduced. I left without saying goodbye. No one noticed until much later, the next morning. My phone was full of messages asking if I had gotten home safe, asking if I could forward the florist receipt, asking if I knew where the extra chair covers had gone. No one asked how I felt. That was normal too. A week later, I was in a hospital room with my father. He had collapsed at home. It turned out to be a cardiac event, serious but survivable. I flew back immediately. My sister met me in the hallway. Eyes red, arms crossed, she said, "We need you to handle the insurance paperwork. You're better at that stuff." I looked at her and saw the wedding all over again, compressed into this moment. I said I would help. Of course I did. While filling out forms, I noticed something off. Policies I didn't recognize. A beneficiary designation that didn't match what my parents had always said. I asked the hospital administrator to clarify. She was careful, professional. She explained that there had been recent changes. I asked when. She gave me a date. It was 3 months earlier. Around the same time my parents had asked me for a temporary loan to help with wedding costs. I asked my father about it when he was awake enough to talk. He was tired. Confused, he said my mother had handled it. I asked my mother directly. She said it was nothing, just simplifying things. I asked why my name wasn't there anymore. She said, "You don't need it." That sentence landed differently than all the jokes. It was quiet and absolute. I requested copies of the documents. It took longer than it should have. There were signatures that looked rushed. There were witnesses I didn't recognize. There was a lawyer's stamp from a firm my parents had never used before. I called the firm. They confirmed the work. They couldn't discuss details without authorization. I asked when the authorization had been given. The date matched the policy change. I went back through my records. I am meticulous with numbers. Years of being the responsible one had trained me that way. I found the transfers, the deposits, the pattern, money moving out in increments that looked harmless on their own, money I had sent to help, redirected elsewhere, not stolen exactly, reassigned, justified by a belief that I would be fine. I didn't confront anyone immediately. I needed to understand the scope. I met with a lawyer quietly on a lunch break. In a building that smelled like old paper and coffee, I brought everything. He listened without interrupting. He asked careful questions. He explained options without promising outcomes. He said words like undue influence and capacity and documentation. He said it would be slow. He said it would be hard. He didn't laugh. While my father recovered, the family settled into routines. I handled appointments. I coordinated meals. I paid for a home nurse for the first few weeks because my mother said it was too expensive otherwise. At night, back in my hotel room, I packed documents into folders. I labeled them. I made copies. I slept poorly but deeply, like someone doing necessary work. The public truth came at a family meeting my mother insisted on. She wanted to discuss next steps. Everyone was there, my sister, her husband, my parents, and uncle. It was held in my parents' living room, the same room where we had celebrated birthdays and graduations. My mother started talking about estate planning, about how things would be fair. I asked her to define fair. She frowned. I laid the documents on the table one by one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. Why had the beneficiary been changed? Why had funds been moved without repayment schedules? Why had I been asked for loans while assets were being reassigned? The room went quiet. Not in a dramatic way, but in a practical one. There were no jokes to hide behind. My sister said I was overreacting. My mother said I was misinterpreting. My father looked small in his chair. Then my lawyer spoke. He introduced himself. He explained the concerns. He explained the potential consequences. He was polite. He was precise. He did not care about family dynamics. The laughter from the wedding echoed in my head, faint and distant, like something from another life. No one laughed now. My sister's husband stared at the floor. My uncle cleared his throat and said he hadn't known. My mother looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as help but as opposition. There were no arrests. There was no shouting. There were meetings and revisions and apologies that sounded more like negotiations. Some things were reversed, some couldn't be. Trust, once documented, doesn't move easily. I agreed to boundaries. I agreed to continue helping in specific, defined ways. I stopped paying for things that weren't mine to pay for. The aftermath was quiet. My sister stopped calling as often. My mother was careful with her words. My father thanked me once, awkwardly. In the hospital hallway, I accepted it without comment. At work, I focused on my job. I slept better. I stopped being the first to arrive and the last to leave everywhere in my life. Months later, I received a message from a cousin who had been at the wedding. She said she hadn't realized how the jokes landed. She said she was sorry. I thanked her. That was